Hi, everybody. I'm Wayne Dawson. I'd like to welcome you to the first ever episode of Wayne's World. This is going to have a little bit of everything: current events, sports, faith, fun. The best part is every show is going to be different. Now, before we get started, an update on my health. As you know, I've been fighting cancer since, well, it's been over a year, as a matter of fact. And this is the first time I've been on the air since last November. So they say it's like riding a bike, but I'll let you know when the show is over. But anyway, I'm doing okay. I'm still fighting. I'm just hoping that everything works out. My goal is to be back on the morning show sometime, maybe in September. But there are some steps I have to take. First of all, as you know, I'm wearing the mask because they took all my teeth out at the bottom. And they still need to do, as I say on my social media broadcasts, they still have to do some nip and tucking on my jaw as well, because they took the bone out of my leg to put it in my jaw. It was a major surgery. But I just thank all you guys once again for all of your love, the support, the cards, and the prayers, because, hey, I tell you what, you need all of that when you're fighting this foe called cancer. But right now, I'd like to introduce my first guest on this inaugural episode of Wayne's World. He is the most decorated sports writer in all of Northeast Ohio. He's been doing it for as long as I've been doing news, for what, 45 years here in Northeast Ohio? Terry Pluto, ladies and gentlemen, Terry Pluto. How you doing, man?
Decorated is nice, but it's a good way of saying he's old.
Well,
but I'll take it.
That makes two of us.
Because, we both want to be, we're about the same age.
Yes, we are.
East side of Cleveland.
That's right.
And we're both still here.
And that's amazing. Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Let me ask you this. First of all, I didn't realize that you're so many awards, the Hall of Fames, and all sports writer of the year. My goodness gracious, man.
Well, I'm glad about that, and I think it's such a blessing to be able to do, like you've done, journalism and TV in your hometown. Well, the same thing with me. I mean, I lived in Parma, I lived in Northfield, lived in Newburgh Heights. Now I live in West Akron. But I found this out like after I graduated from Cleveland State. My first job was in Greensboro, North Carolina. And I'm a young writer there, and I remember the ACC tournament is there.
Okay.
And that's a big deal, Duke, North Carolina, all those schools. And my friends on the paper all were very excited about this, and they all had long sports ties to the different schools. Well, which is your favorite? And I'm like, well, I kind of like North Carolina just because I was a young writer and Dean Smith was nice to me, but no connection. And then I went from there to Savannah, Georgia, then to Baltimore, to Cleveland. Mm-hmm. My goal actually was to come back here and write about the teams that I grew up with, because there's an instant familiarity with it. They always call it institutional knowledge. Mm-hmm. Forget that. Mm-hmm. Just that you get it, and that kind of thing. And so, but it really underlined that point when I worked elsewhere. And Wayne, I think that sometimes is very helpful for some of us who grew up, and if you just, like I know you just went straight to the market here, but you really realize what a special place this is when you have worked elsewhere.
Absolutely, yeah. Let me ask you this. You graduated from Benedictine High School, went to Cleveland State, and you majored, in education or something like that? Did you want to be a sports writer when you first graduated from high school?
Yes, I did. Well, I wanted to be a writer of some sort, a novelist, a writer, and so on.
Okay.
And I...
Did you play sports in high school?
Yeah, I played them badly, but I did. I was on the baseball team. Okay. And the basketball team, I scored 8 points my junior year on the JVs.
Wait a minute, a game, or is that 8 points for the whole year?
Yeah, I got 3 against Collinwood. I think, they probably fired the coach after the game from Collinwood. But the point being that I was a bad athlete, so I spent a lot of time on the bench observing sports, which is great training for what I do now. And it's really funny. I'm sure the people that were on the baseball team with me, it's like I'm writing about this guy, and he's a pitcher and hitter, and they remember, well, the only thing Terry knew about pitching is he couldn't hit it. I mean, that was about it. But to see how God, put me in this remarkable position, because I didn't come from any sort of journalism or writing family. My dad worked at Old Fisher Foods and later Fisher Fazio's for years. I worked in the warehouse there. And then my mom worked in various bowling alleys. And I've probably written more books than were in our house growing up. But they loved newspapers, both my mom and dad. Okay. And so that was the thing there. So while I was growing up and I had a teacher, and sometimes somebody needs to give you a vision, Wayne. And there was a guy named Jim Muth at Benedictine, a 9th grade English teacher, and he liked my writing.
Okay.
He said, you can do this. And he was running the high school paper. And then later on, he gave me a book. It was called The Greatest Thing Since Sliced Bread by a Cleveland writer named Don Robertson. It was a novel. Don, for years, wrote at the Plain Dealer in the press. He kind of bounced back and forth. And he said, you know, you could do this. You could write books. And I'm like, really? I'm not getting, still in the 9th grade. And I thought writers all lived in New York or LA. And he goes, well, look, Don's from here. He went to East High. You know, why not? And it kind of got in my head. But as you mentioned about my degree in secondary education and that, so I'm at Cleveland State. And while I'm already at that point working part-time at the old Cleveland Press and kind of selling some stories to the Plain Dealer Sunday magazine and covering high school games freelance, I mean, my parents came out of depression in World War II. I was like, you got to make sure you have a job. And I realized if I get certified to teach, that's kind of a great backup. So my degree is secondary ed, social studies,
But you always had that
English.
writing.
Oh, yeah. This was a backup. But I think that's one of the things that when you go to school, get something you can use to get you a job, even if that's not exactly what you're pursuing.
What you're doing now is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a sports writer, a newspaper sports writer. And that was my major when I went to college. But somehow I ended up on television, not even doing sports.
Right.
But you have the dream job as far as I'm concerned. You really, really do. Now, you were in other cities before you came back to Cleveland.
Yes.
And when you came back, did you work for the Cleveland Press? Or who did you work for when you came
The
back
Plain
home?
Dealer, I came back as their baseball writer.
Okay.
It's hard to believe there was ever a baseball writer before Paul Hoynes, who's, I think, done it for nearly 40 years.
Right.
But that was me.
Okay.
And I did that for 5 years. And then I went to the Beacon Journal. I was there for 22 years. First, I covered the Cavaliers. Then I became a columnist.
Okay.
But I think the thing that when people say, I want to be a sports writer or whatever, and I often ask them, well, I would have said to you,
That was me, man.
but why would you want to do it back then?
Because for me, that would be getting paid to do something that I loved. That's what my thought process is. I was like you. I wasn't a great athlete in high school, but I loved sports. So I said, if I can't play it, I want to at least be part of it, get into the games free, talk to the players and all of that.
Well, see, what I would have said to you, Wayne, is like, you could like sports, but you better love to write.
Well, I do love to write.
Yeah,
to be
and
honest
I know
with
you do, but I'm saying that's one of the things
That's the key.
Just like I want to be in broadcasting. You better love the technical part and the thing about putting together.
And you love to write because in
Yes.
addition to all the articles you've written how many books now?
Too many, over 30.
Oh,
but,
my gosh.
But the idea being, well, it's just like my dear friend Joe Tate and Tom Hamilton and I also had the same discussion. They will tell you, yeah, that Tom likes baseball and Joe loved basketball. But what they really love is broadcasting. You know, because Joe Tate would turn around and go do a girls' high school basketball game.
I remember him doing
He
that.
would do those different because he liked the idea.
He did
of
the Indians,
broadcasting.
didn't he? Do
He did baseball. He did hockey, minor league hockey. He did the Cavs forever. He did some network stuff on different things. But the idea, again, the broadcasting is, if you want to write, you better write, and you better love to write, and you better look at how other people are writing their stories and look at it like a coach critiques a game film.
That's right.
And see what makes that good. I bet when you look at broadcasts, how do you look at
Absolutely. When I was in college, and even now, I look at other broadcasters and I try to, if I see them doing something I like, I try to mimic that. And I tell young students that as well. Look at people, look at newscasters that you may like, and try to model yourself after them. You mentioned Joe Tate.
Yeah.
You wrote a book on Joe Tate. What was so special about the voice of the Cleveland Cavaliers?
Well, Joe actually called me to write it with him because he would say every day, these guys are asking me to do a book. I don't want to do a book or whatever. Well, Joe and I are really close. I never asked him. But I think after he began to have some health problems and things, and he thought, maybe it's time. So I go over to his house. We're going to do this book. He comes out. He has a big dining room table.
Okay.
He had 13 boxes of stuff that he had saved over the years. He had like his second grade report cards.
Oh, really?
He had all these things of his life. The whole book, and in fact, a lot more, we could have done the Encyclopedia Britannica with all the stuff he had, were there. And what made that, special for him, he kind of went into broadcasting in college, but he didn't, like me, he didn't have the background. There wasn't anybody, you were not preordained by your family to do this.
Absolutely.
But he soon loved radio.
He loved radio.
And he loved the railroad. He always said if I wasn't going to be on the radio, I would be working on the railroad. He liked railroad stuff, and when he was a kid in high school, he would dress up like a railroad engineer, and people would make fun of him, kind of like Casey Jones or whatever. But what we both kind of found as we together was a love for what we do, and just you need to, especially when I cover the Cavs, you're on the road a lot, and also before that, when he was doing the Indians on TV, and I was covering that, you just develop friendships there. And sometimes you see more of them than you do your wife or whatever.
I remember these good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. That is right. And so that became just, he had a lot of different stories about how he was able to kind of survive all this. And it was a fun book to do, and it was fun to do it with a friend. And he basically just kind of said, you just write it. And it's written in the third person.
You mentioned survive.
Yeah.
How have you survived all these years in the ever-changing world of newspaper reporting?
Well, it's an old line from Earl Weaver. Earl Weaver managed the Orioles in 1979 when I covered them in Baltimore, which, by the way, Earl Weaver was like one of the first great managers to use statistics. He's in the Hall of Fame. And one of his lines is, it's what you learn after you know it all that counts. It's what you learn after you know it all that counts. I try to keep that in mind because especially in my business, technology really changes. And try to kind of keep up with that and not be an old grump about stuff. And that's one thing. Secondly is you have to stay current. I mean, yes, it's nice. I write a number of nostalgic stories. My audience tends to be a little older. They like that. But that can't be the only thing that I'm writing about. I mean, I have to make sure I still have contacts with the current general managers and the current people with the running the teams. And also just try to think about like a fan. What would a fan want to know?
There you go. I'm going to stop you right there. Going to take a quick break. We are talking with Terry Pluto. When we come back, we're going to talk Cleveland sports and faith. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to Wayne's World. If you're just joining us, we are here with the one and only Terry Pluto. We've already picked his brain about his background and all of that. Now we're going to talk about Cleveland sports. Terry, you've covered sports in Cleveland for 4 decades now. Your favorite moment after all these years?
Well, given the fact that we've not exactly been the home of champions in Cleveland, although my high school Benedictine, that was always the thing.
You do remember the '64 Browns, as I do.
Yes, but I was only 9 and didn't cover that.
We were only 9 at the time.
On the radio in my neighbor's basement because it was blacked out in Cleveland.
Can I say one thing? Jim Brown, I loved him. Paul Warfield was my favorite player of all time.
Oh,
Number 42, Paul Warfield.
Paul Warfield.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, Frank Ryan, number 13.
Number 13.
And all those.
Yeah.
But to cover a Cleveland team that won a title was, of course, 2016. The Cavs were down 3-1, became the first team ever to come back and win a title, led by LeBron James. And, it was this incredible story. I mean, I first interviewed LeBron, like, when he was, like, 14 or 15, like, right after his freshman year at St. Vincent, St. Mary's in Akron. And to watch him come back, get them there. But the coolest thing, so they beat Golden State in Game 7, Father's Day, in fact, in 93-89. I rarely remember a story, but I wanted that one because when I was writing that, I had 18 minutes to write the story after it was over. It was a Sunday night to get it in. So I'm watching, and they won this game. And so often we in Cleveland have seen visiting fans take over our stadiums or our arenas after they beat our teams in a big game. But this time, you see these Golden State fans trudging out of the old Oracle Arena with their heads down, like they all just found out their cars have been stolen, their houses have been burned down.
Been stolen,
yeah, they could have been over there too. But just down, and all of a sudden it seemed like 750 or 1,000 of these Cavs fans. They line the court because the Cavs are out there celebrating and holding up the trophy.
Were you there at the time?
Oh, yeah.
You were out there doing it?
And that's what I'm saying. And they just start chanting. I'm just wrapping up like the first fire thing of my version of my story.
Okay.
And they're chanting, "Let's go Cavs, let's go Cavs." And LeBron's out there holding the trophy and he's crying. And you know, I'm already starting to get emails from fans all over the place of what this meant to them. And for me to have, and I considered it a privilege to write this story, even if it was only in 18 minutes, the first version, and then come back and write more things, was just so much fun because I know how long, if you go from 1964 to 2016, people have been waiting for that.
Your favorite Browns memory?
Well,
you really got to pick your brain for this one.
Yeah, I mean, the 64, I wasn't there.
Yeah.
The stuff I covered, that is the problem, Wayne. You really want to know the problem? If you don't go back to the Bernie Kosar era, you probably don't have a favorite Browns memory. And when Bernie had the team going, I was covering the Cavaliers. So I wasn't even there. So my favorite Browns moment, I'm still waiting for.
I'm still waiting. Okay. All right. What about the Indians/Guardians?
Oh, that was in 1995
Yes.
when they beat Seattle to go to the World Series because it was a game where an aging Dennis Martinez was pitching for Cleveland. I had first got to know Dennis in 1979 when I was covering the Orioles in Baltimore, and he was a young pitcher. Now he comes back here in the middle 90s, and he's facing Randy Johnson. Again, it was on the road, not at home. Seattle was a kingdom, and it was very loud. Randy Johnson at that point was one of the best pitcher in baseball.
Oh, he was.
I mean, he's throwing 100 miles an hour, and Dennis is like he's in the slow line trying to trick people. And even before the game, Sheldon Oker, who was a baseball writer with the Akron Beacon Journal, this was when I was with the Beacon Journal, we ran into Dennis in the hotel lobby about 3 hours before. And he's pacing up and down. He's so nervous about this. He goes, I don't want to be out there alone now. I mean, I've been in some big games. I don't know about the rest of these guys.
Yeah.
And they're like, you know. And then he pulls out this thing. Let me show you this. And he goes, it's a golden Buckeye coin. Bob Feller gave it to me this morning. I didn't have the heart to tell him that the only postseason game Feller ever pitched, he lost.
Oh my
But
gosh.
it's like, but he went out, we saw that, then see him pitch with so much confidence in that environment. That's when Kenny Lofton scored from second base on a pass ball. And I'm sitting there writing a story that I never expected in my lifetime, which was the Tribe was going to the World Series.
Everybody thought so.
Granted, they lost.
Everybody thought they would win the World Series.
Yeah. And even though they had a great team, we were just waiting for yet another Cleveland blowout in the clutch. Only they didn't blow it out. They got there. And so those two things to see, because I also know, having grown up here, the advantage of that, what those two events meant to the local sports fans.
It's hard being a Cleveland sports fan. Is it hard being a Cleveland sports writer?
Well, I have to admit, part of my motto of surviving all these years is I never let the millionaires ruin my day.
What do you mean?
By that, I mean, they're all these millionaire athletes or whatever.
I got you.
I never let them ruin my day.
Gosh.
I mean, you know.
I love it.
Because a lot of, I mean, I get disappointed in this because I also know it's a much better story when they win than when they lose. It just is. Once in a while I have a player say, well, yeah, you like it when it's a mess and there's controversial losing. Go, that sells papers or gets internet hits. I say, you want to know what sells papers or internet hits? Winning. We sold 530,000 extra versions of the paper in 2016 when they won the title.
I have that at home.
They had to keep printing more and more because they found out.
Your favorite player that you've covered all these years? Or did you have a favorite?
Oh, yeah. Probably when I was a young basketball writer doing the Cavaliers, it was World Be Free.
World Be Free?
Because we got to be very close.
Really?
Yeah. It was just it was only for my first year
Some
there.
people say he saved the franchise.
Yes, he did. We used to play three-point horse after practice.
You played with him?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
He would give me. All I had to do was get one letter on him to beat him.
Okay.
I mean, all this. It's a long thing, but it was so much fun, and he was just such a great guy. I remember he goes, you know, you could drug taste me for anything but Budweiser. I mean, it was just a different. I think because I like basketball, and I mean, here I am there, and actually, at that point, sometimes after practice, because they didn't have all these extra people around, they would get a couple of us sports writers like Bert Grafe and myself.
Really?
We would end up playing full
Wow.
court with them. We kind of stay out of the way. They
Yeah,
just
yeah.
want 10 guys out
Let me
there.
ask you this, how has covering sports changed over the years compared to those days and now?
Well, just the access I told you, that there, you ain't going to get that now. Gone. I mean, I get it. Media's so big, you know, social media, all this stuff. So a lot more things are just orchestrated, and that has changed it for us. So a lot of times people would want, well, you need to ask this player this or that. They don't give us the access. That's it's
Just teams don't give you the access?
oh no.
Okay.
They control it.
Why is it that most of the stories are now broken on the national level, even before they're broken
Number
local?
one, they discovered that ESPN and the rest of us, if we're paying all this money for the rights to your games, you give us the stories. Secondly, some of your national reporters are represented by the same sports agencies
Oh, got it.
as the players. So it all kind of goes together. And that's why I think it's much harder for the beat people now than when I covered.
Yeah.
I'm glad that I could kind of do it from more, say, a little bit farther distance away, big
Yeah.
picture stuff as a columnist.
Let's talk about your faith. You do a faith column. And how many years have you been doing the faith column?
25.
25
It
years.
started in the year 2000 when I was at the Beacon Journal. And that's when Regina Brett was a writer at the Beacon Journal. She came up to Cleveland to write a regular news column. And so there was there was an editor there named Jan Leach, and she came to me. She took Roberta, my wife, and I out to dinner, and she said, would you want to replace Regina and be a regular kind of news site columnist? Well, I had watched sports writers try this before. It didn't work well because people identify you as a sports columnist. Besides, when you're writing sports, I always have something. Somebody wants to be traded, somebody wins, somebody loses. There's inherent conflict and drama built into all that. It's kind of like saying, here's an empty screen. Write me anything you want, or write me something about your grandmother.
Okay.
It's much easier when you have this thing picked out, the subject. Because write me anything you want, you can just stare at that and go, I can't think of a thing.
Right.
And so so I didn't want to do that. And so we were talking about, forgotten the subject of ministry. I was doing jail ministry at the time.
Now,
with
how did you
Roberta
start
and I.
getting? Have you always been a man of faith?
I got real serious with it in the middle 90s when my dad had a stroke.
Okay.
Before I would say I went to church like I would use deodorant or toothpaste, you know. I believe there was a God, a higher power, but nothing like a personal get there. And I really think when you're in a crisis, especially as an adult, you either get closer to God and get real about God, or you back away because you're angry and disappointed. Well, with my dad and the stroke is a long, tough time. That brought me closer, and then that led to, but anyway, the faith column, so I just mentioned to her about, I thought our religion page had great features on different people. I said, but you run these columns down the side, and they're not faith-based. They're all like politics, abortion, you know, all the hot-button issues. She goes, what would you write? And I mentioned, well, like when I was taking care of my dad, and you feel like you're praying, and the prayers are bouncing off the ceiling. You know, where's God in all this? And she, oh, that's really interesting. You let me think about that. I thought, oh, well, this might be fun. And then I heard nothing for 6 months. So I thought, well, that went well. And then she came back and she said, write me 2 samples. She did, and so we started running them there.
You've written books as well.
Yeah,
And how many books have you written on faith?
I think about 6.
Okay,
A
now
lot of them, some of them are collections of faith columns that I did.
It's with the columns. When you look at those when you pick those columns for the book, what do you look for?
Well, sometimes, thanks to the internet, I get reactions from people that this has touched them. But also, you know, the column is called Faith in You. You know, where do you live? And a lot of them are built on emails that I get from somebody. You know, my wife has had Parkinson's for 15 years, and you know, we've been going through this or that. This helped me get through it. And I really, you know, with Psalm 23, though I walk through the shadow of valley, people think we just get the helicopter over. No, we go through, you know this more than anybody, how deep that valley can be.
That can be deep.
And like in your case, has it brought you closer or farther?
It's brought me closer. You know, it really has brought me closer. You know, I have a tighter relationship with our Heavenly Father because of what I've gone through, no doubt about that.
Even when you're kind of looking up at the heavens and...
Yeah, I'm like, why me, Lord? You know, but he says, you know what? You got to trust me. And so I'm trusting him.
I'm kind of like that, in a sense, too, there's a thing in the Bible where Jesus gives a real tough sermon, and all these people walk away, and only he's got kind of his core group, about 8 or 10 or whatever it was there.
Right.
And he says to Peter, well, are you going to leave too? And Peter stops for a moment and goes, well, where else am I going to go?
Where else am I going to go? Terry Pluto. Man, you are excellent. Thank you so much for
You're
being
welcome,
my first guest on Wayne's World. I appreciate it, man.
Well, as long as we don't shut it down after one episode,
Oh my gosh.
I'll be very happy.
Well, I guess I wanted to ask you real quick before we go. We've got about 10 seconds. The first Cleveland team to win the next championship will be?
It should be the Cavaliers at some point.
All right. Taking that to the bank. Taking it to the bank. Once again, thank you so much for joining us on our first episode of Wayne's World. Remember this, whatever the mind can conceive and believe, with God's help, it can achieve. See you next week.